When Jack's wife casually announced she was going out with a coworker, he expected a confession. Instead, she challenged his trust. But Jack's plan to mirror her betrayal turned into a twist he never saw coming. A night that would expose buried truths and test the limits of love, pride, and forgiveness. Jack sat on the couch, eyes on the TV but mind nowhere near it. The sound was just background noise to his thoughts, which spun in circles without landing on anything real. That Friday night had started like any other, until Sarah walked into the living room. She didn't look angry. She didn't even seem upset. Her expression was strangely calm, like someone announcing a weather report. "This Friday, I'm going out with a coworker." No buildup, no explanation. Just that. Jack's brain stalled for a second. His first instinct was to question her. Who? Why? What kind of coworker? But instead, his mouth moved on its own. "That's great," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've actually been meaning to ask a coworker out too. I think I'll do that. You're okay with it, right?" It was a lie, a bluff, but it hit her like a slap. Sarah's composure faltered. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Finally, she nodded slowly. "No, of course not." Her voice was thin, her tone uncertain, like something inside her cracked. Jack stood up, calmly, deliberately. He didn't trust himself to say anything more, so he left the room. The tension was thick, but he didn't let it show. If she was testing him, he'd play the same game. Tit for tat. But the second he closed the door behind him, the doubt crept in. Was she serious? Was this real? Was it some weird attempt to get a reaction from him? That night changed something between them. The air felt different. Every movement was loaded, every silence heavy. Meals were short, conversations shorter. They'd gone from partners to actors sharing a stage, both pretending the play wasn't about to collapse. Jack started noticing things. The way Sarah held her phone tighter, the way she smiled at texts she didn't share. She didn't lie, she just said less, much less. At work, Jack found himself watching Lisa, the assistant manager from HR. She'd always been friendly, professional, but lately he caught himself thinking about her differently. Not romantically, more as a mirror. If Sarah could suddenly go out with someone, why couldn't he? Still, he didn't move on it. Lisa wasn't part of this story. Not really. She was just a placeholder for what Jack didn't want to admit. He was scared. Scared he'd already lost something he hadn't known he was supposed to protect. Days ticked by. Jack kept pretending he was fine. Sarah did the same. But the silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was charged like the quiet before a storm. By Wednesday, he had confirmation. Sarah said she'd made plans with her coworker, Michael, the guy she'd mentioned once or twice. Jack didn't ask questions. He just nodded. "Cool," he said, matching her tone. "Lisa and I might grab a drink too." Another lie. Lisa hadn't even responded to his last message. Thursday came and went, and Jack couldn't focus on anything. Work dragged like an anchor. He checked his phone constantly, hoping for a message from Lisa that would make his bluff real. But when her message finally came, it wasn't what he hoped for. "Sorry, something came up. Rain check?" Perfect. Now he was bluffing with a busted hand. Sarah, meanwhile, was still moving forward with her plan. Friday night arrived. Jack walked into the bedroom to find Sarah staring into the mirror, silent. She looked distant, nervous maybe, not like someone excited for a date, but like someone walking into a situation they weren't sure about. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "So, you're really going out?" She met his eyes through the mirror. "Yeah." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just confirmation. Jack buttoned his shirt, pretending he had somewhere to be too. They didn't say much after that. She picked up her purse, said she'd be back later, and walked out the front door. He didn't stop her. He could have. He wanted to. But pride is a loud thing, and it drowns out common sense. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the house felt wrong. Not empty, just off. Like something had been removed and replaced with silence. Jack sat back on the couch, the same spot he'd been in when it all started. And this time, the TV was off. No background noise. Just the sound of his own thoughts. And none of them were comforting. He kept thinking about what came next. Would she come back smiling? Would she talk about her night? Would she lie? And what would he do if she told the truth? Jack glanced at the clock. 7:58 p.m. He grabbed his car keys. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know what he was doing, but something in him needed to move, to see, to understand what was happening. As he backed out of the driveway, the streetlights flickered on. The night was quiet, but his chest was anything but. He didn't even realize where he was going until he found himself downtown, across from a restaurant Michael had once mentioned. Jack pulled up across the street, parked, and turned off the engine. He waited, and minutes later, Sarah arrived. Jack sat behind the wheel, parked under a dim streetlight across from the restaurant. His eyes stayed locked on the entrance, ignoring the hum of the city around him. A part of him hoped this was all a misunderstanding, that Sarah was there for some innocent reason. But another part, the one he wasn't proud of, wanted confirmation, proof that his suspicions weren't just paranoia. When Sarah stepped out of a rideshare and walked toward the restaurant, Jack's breath caught. She moved with intention, but not confidence. Her steps were slow, measured, like she wasn't sure she wanted to be there. She entered alone. Jack leaned back in his seat and waited. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Then Michael showed up. Clean cut, late 30s, walked like a guy used to being heard. He greeted the host and was taken to a table near the window. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared at the same table. Jack's stomach tightened. This was it. But the scene unfolding in front of him didn't match the one in his head. Michael wasn't leaning in. Sarah wasn't smiling like someone on a date. Their expressions were serious, focused. No touching, no flirting, just two people talking. And it didn't look easy. Michael gestured a lot, explaining something. Sarah listened more than she spoke, occasionally nodding. At one point, she even pulled out a notepad. Jack blinked. Was this work? He leaned forward, elbows on the steering wheel, watching closely. The tension in his chest shifted. Less jealousy now, more confusion. He hadn't expected professionalism. He'd expected betrayal. This wasn't a romantic dinner. It was a business meeting. Jack sat there, the realization creeping in slowly. He had been wrong. Not just a little off. Completely. He'd let his fears write the story for him, filling in blanks with worst-case assumptions. And now that he saw the truth, he didn't know what to do with it. As their meeting dragged on, he thought about everything that had brought them here. It hadn't started with Sarah announcing she was going out. It started long before that. With distance, with silence, with both of them going through motions instead of talking. Somewhere along the line, they stopped confiding in each other. And now he was spying on his own wife like a stranger. An hour passed. Sarah stood first, shook Michael's hand, and left the restaurant alone. Jack didn't follow her. He didn't need to. He already knew what he had to do, what he should have done days ago. He waited until she was out of sight, then drove home. Back inside the house, the quiet returned. But it felt different this time. Less threatening, more revealing. Jack sat down on the same couch, this time not to escape, but to reflect. He realized how quick he'd been to judge, how easily he had mirrored her actions instead of confronting her with honesty. His lie about Lisa, the fake confidence, the silence, all of it had created distance where there should have been clarity. Sarah came home an hour later. The sound of the door unlocking made Jack sit up, heart racing again, but for a different reason now. She stepped inside, surprised to see him. Maybe she'd expected him to be out, faking his own night like she had faked interest in his approval. Their eyes met. Jack didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked one question. How was it? Sarah hesitated. The room held still. It was about work, she finally said. Michael offered me a chance to apply for a new position, a management role. I needed to talk it through before committing. I should have told you. Jack nodded once. He believed her, but he didn't let her off the hook. Why didn't you tell me from the start? She put her purse down, sat on the chair across from him, and looked at him. Not past him, not through him, but directly at him. Because I thought you didn't care anymore. The words landed harder than he expected. I felt like I was on my own. Like whatever I did didn't matter to you. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to feel like I had control over something. Jack exhaled. The fight he'd imagined, the yelling, the accusations, it all disappeared. In its place was something quieter, heavier, real. I do care, he said after a moment. I just didn't know how to say it without sounding weak or insecure. So I played it cool, tried to match you. That was a mistake. Sarah looked down, her voice softer now. I only said what I said that night because I wanted to see if you'd react, if you still cared. I did, Jack said, but instead of showing it, I played along. I lied. Told you I had someone too. I didn't. I just didn't want to feel like I was the only one who didn't matter. They sat in silence, not out of awkwardness, but out of mutual exhaustion. Both had tried to test each other, and both had nearly failed. Jack looked at her and said, "We can't keep doing this." Sarah nodded. They weren't healed. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, they were honest. That was a start. The house was quiet the next morning, but not the kind of silence that suffocates. This one felt more like a truce. Fragile, but real. Jack woke up early, not because he had to, but because sleep had become a stranger lately. He moved around the kitchen, brewing coffee, not expecting Sarah to join him. But she did. She didn't say much, just sat across from him and poured herself a cup. They sipped in silence, both knowing the conversation from the night before had opened a door neither of them could close again. And maybe that was a good thing. Jack cleared his throat. About last night, Sarah looked up. I didn't follow you because I didn't trust you, he said. I followed you because I realized I didn't know you anymore. And I hated that. Sarah nodded slowly. I didn't feel known either. That's why I didn't tell you about the promotion. It felt like we'd stopped being a team. That word hit hard. Team. Jack couldn't remember the last time they'd made a decision together. Their routines had become parallel lines, never clashing, but never touching. Every conversation had been surface level, every gesture half-measured. He set his cup down. What happens now? Sarah leaned back in her chair, not out of defiance, but because she needed space to think. I don't know. I guess we figure out if we're still capable of being honest. Not just when we're pushed into it, but all the time. It wasn't a solution, but it was something better. Direction. The following days weren't magical. Nothing fixed itself overnight. They still argued, still drifted into silence sometimes. But the difference was they didn't stay there. When one pulled away, the other noticed. When something hurt, they said it. And slowly the wall started to come down. Jack deleted Lisa's number, not out of guilt, but because he finally saw the difference between temptation and distraction. Lisa hadn't done anything wrong, but the way he'd used her in his mind, as a counterbalance to Sarah, felt wrong now. She wasn't a person in that narrative. She'd been a pawn, and Jack was done playing games. One evening, Sarah sat down next to him with a notepad in hand. I want to show you something. She flipped it open to a page filled with notes, ideas, outlines for a project she'd been working on at work. If I get the promotion, I'll be managing this. It's something I've been building for months. I didn't talk about it because I guess I stopped thinking you'd be interested. Jack read the notes. Not all of it made sense to him. Corporate jargon wasn't his strength, but he listened. And more importantly, he asked questions. Real ones. Sarah smiled, not because she got praise, but because she finally felt seen. The next weekend, Jack did something small but meaningful. He suggested they drive out to a hiking trail they used to visit years ago, back when everything felt lighter. It wasn't about reliving old memories. It was about making space for new ones. During the hike, they talked about things that had nothing to do with work or problems. Just memories, shared jokes, small dreams. Jack confessed he'd been thinking about changing departments at work, maybe moving into something with less stress. Why didn't you say anything before? Sarah asked. I didn't think you'd care, he admitted. Sarah stopped walking and turned to him. That's exactly how I felt about the promotion. They both laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony had been sitting in front of them the whole time. When they got back to the car, Sarah looked at him seriously. I think we got so used to functioning that we forgot how to connect. And when things got quiet, we panicked. Jack nodded. We tried to force a reaction instead of having a conversation. There were no grand conclusions, no cinematic moments, but they were talking, and more than that, they were listening. And for now, that was enough. That night, Jack couldn't sleep again, but this time, it wasn't anxiety, it was clarity. He stared at the ceiling, thinking not about what Sarah had done or hadn't done, but what he had ignored for too long. He realized that trust doesn't erode all at once. It happens gradually. Missed moments, assumptions, silence. Then one day, you wake up and feel like you're sharing a life with a stranger. But the opposite is also true. Trust can be rebuilt, one honest word at a time. The next morning, Sarah was already up. She'd made a decision. She was going to apply for the promotion. But this time, she wasn't doing it alone. She slid the application across the table. "Can you read it before I submit?" Jack took the paper and smiled. "I'd be proud to." The day Sarah submitted her application, the energy between them shifted. Not dramatically, not like flipping a switch. But Jack noticed it. The way she carried herself. The way she moved through the house with purpose again. For the first time in months, she wasn't carrying her weight alone. And Jack, he finally knew what his role was. Support, not silence. That evening, they went out for dinner. Not to impress anyone or mask their tension, but just to be out together. No mentions of coworkers, no pretending. Just two people trying to reconnect after almost losing what mattered most. They laughed a little, shared stories they hadn't told each other. The conversation didn't revolve around damage control, which felt like progress. But healing isn't linear. A few nights later, it happened again, a moment that could have pulled them right back into old habits. Jack got a text from Lisa. "Hey, just checking in. Hope everything's okay." It wasn't flirty, it wasn't inappropriate, but Jack stared at it longer than he should have. He wasn't tempted. Not really. But the timing was brutal. It was just enough to poke at the part of him that still wanted validation, still wanted to feel like someone was paying attention to his needs for once. He could have ignored it, or he could have responded casually. Instead, he handed the phone to Sarah. "This is what I got today." She read the message. Her expression didn't change. "Did you respond?" "No. I wanted you to see it first." She handed the phone back. "Thanks for showing me." That was it. No argument. No passive-aggressive exchange. Just clarity. Moments like that started stacking up. Small acts of transparency. Fewer assumptions. More uncomfortable honesty. Every time one of them could have hidden something and didn't, it added a brick back into the foundation they'd been quietly rebuilding. A week later, Sarah got called in for an interview. Jack offered to help her prepare. Not because he knew the answers, but because she needed someone to listen, to challenge her thinking, to believe in her. And for the first time in a long while, she let him. Meanwhile, Jack started reevaluating his own career. He wasn't as fulfilled as he used to be, and now that Sarah was aiming higher, it made him question why he wasn't. He started applying to internal roles that focused more on development and less on crisis management. He didn't tell Sarah at first, not because he was hiding it, but because he wanted to be sure of it himself. But he did tell her before the interview, over coffee. "I'm thinking of moving departments." Sarah looked at him, surprised but not doubtful. "That sounds good. Do you think it'll make you happier?" "I think it might make me feel like I'm not stuck." That was the truth. They'd both been stuck. The difference now was that they were pulling each other forward instead of dragging each other down. The day of Sarah's interview, Jack drove her to the office. She hadn't asked him to. He just offered. They didn't talk much on the way, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was focused. "Good luck," Jack said before she got out of the car. "Thanks for driving me," she replied. Then she smiled. Not a forced one, not a polite one. A real one. Jack didn't realize how much he'd missed that look until now. The hours crawled by while she was gone. Jack tried to work but couldn't focus. He wasn't nervous about whether she'd get the promotion. He was thinking about what would come next, how this shift in her life would affect theirs. He didn't want to be left behind, but more importantly, he didn't want to be the person who held her back. When she came home that evening, she was exhausted but hopeful. "I think it went well," she said. Jack didn't press her for details. He just said, "I'm proud of you for going for it." And he meant it. That weekend, they cleaned the garage together. Not because it was symbolic, but because it needed to be done. And somewhere between sorting out boxes and tossing old junk, Jack realized something. It wasn't the grand gestures that rebuilt their relationship. It was this: doing ordinary things, side by side, with intention. Sarah found an old photo album in one of the boxes, pictures from their early years, vacations, birthdays, bad haircuts. They sat on the floor flipping through it. No tears, no forced nostalgia. Just quiet recognition of how far they'd drifted and how far they'd come back. As Jack flipped to a photo of them on their honeymoon, both sunburned, both smiling, Sarah rested her hand on his. "We used to be really good at this," she said. Jack looked at her. "We can be again." It wasn't a promise. It was a possibility, and that was more honest than anything they'd said in months. That night, they sat on the porch with their drinks, watching the last bit of light disappear. The future still felt uncertain, but they weren't afraid of it anymore. Sarah spoke first. "Even if I don't get the job, I'm glad I tried." "You will," Jack replied. "But yeah, I'm glad too." They didn't need to say more. For the first time in a long time, they weren't trying to win anything. They weren't playing defense. They were just together. No more games. 2 weeks passed. Sarah got the promotion. Jack was the first person she told. Before her co-workers, before her parents. He was waiting outside her office building when she walked out, still in shock from the news. She got in the car, holding the letter, and handed it to him silently. He read it, looked at her, and said, "You earned this." She didn't cry. Neither did he. They didn't need a dramatic reaction. They just shared a moment of quiet, relieved pride. This time, it wasn't about fixing something. It was about recognizing growth. At home that evening, they didn't celebrate with champagne or takeout. They sat at the table and talked about what the promotion would mean. Longer hours, more responsibility, a new office in another building across town. Jack asked real questions. Sarah gave real answers. It wasn't just about her job anymore. It was about how they would adjust as a couple. "I don't want this to be the thing that pulls us apart again," she said. Jack nodded. "It won't be. Not if we're both paying attention now." They didn't make big declarations. They just made plans. How they'd divide time. What support looked like in practice, not theory. That was the difference now. They were working on things before they broke, not after. Meanwhile, Jack got called in for an interview himself. He didn't mention it right away. Not because he was hiding it, but because for once, it wasn't about making a point. It was just about following through. He got the new role, a lateral move, but one that gave him more space to breathe, more time at home. When he told Sarah, she didn't just congratulate him. She asked if he felt like he'd made the right call. He did. Life didn't suddenly become easy. There were still days when they fell into old patterns, missed signals, forgotten check-ins. But those slips didn't turn into silence anymore. They addressed them, quickly, calmly. One Saturday afternoon, while sorting out some papers, Jack found the old note Sarah had written him on their 5th anniversary. It had been stuck between two books, long forgotten. In it, she'd written that the only thing she wanted more than success in life was someone who paid attention to who she was becoming, not just who she'd been. Jack read it twice. Then he walked into the room where Sarah was working and handed it to her. "I found this. I wasn't listening back then. I want to now." She didn't say anything. She just took his hand, and that was enough. That night, they went for a walk around their neighborhood. It wasn't planned. It just felt like the right thing to do. As they walked, they talked about small things. Books they wanted to read, meals they wanted to cook, places they hadn't been in years. But underneath those simple topics was something deeper, the understanding that they had nearly lost each other, not because of betrayal or some great catastrophe, but because of inattention. And they weren't going to let that happen again. When they got back home, Jack paused at the front door. "Do you think we're okay?" he asked. Sarah looked at him. "I think we're better than we were, because now we know what to protect." Jack nodded. He opened the door, and they went inside, together.